Good evening. I hope that nobody will think I'm copying a plea if I say I'm a little tired. And so if you can't hear me up there, you have to let me know. Now, before I begin, let me say this. I have set arbitrarily, I have set us the somewhat delicate task of discussing our common trouble tonight. That is, there are some things that I want to talk about, to suggest to you, and then I want to find out what you think, and perhaps we can establish a dialogue, and if we are extremely disciplined and hard-headed, passionate and moral, we might be able even to rock that rock which is called Washington. I know, in fact, that when this meeting was envisioned on the 28th of August in Washington, when Bayard suggested that we ought to have some kind of open discussion about what follows the Washington March, obviously Bayard, neither Bayard nor I nor any of you supposed that less than 4 weeks later we would be representatives of a nation which is, or which certainly ought to be, in mourning. Now, I have to say some very reckless things tonight, and so I want to make it absolutely clear that I am talking for myself. I am not, I might be at other platforms and other occasions, more or less representing this or that organization or this or that committee, but tonight I am talking to you as Jimmy Baldwin, who was born in Harlem 39 years ago, who has a certain responsibility to the people that produced him, that is all of you. And I'm speaking to you, if I may say so, not as an organizer, and not as a Negro leader, and not as a public figure, not as any of those things, but as one of the poets that you produced. We have to talk about economics tonight, and in some detail, we must talk about morals, and I think in some detail, and we must talk about something even more difficult to put one's finger on, which for the moment we will call morale. And the assumption on which I am speaking is this: that whether or not we like it, we have reached a point, black and white, in this country where all of the previous systems of communication, negotiation, accommodation have become unusable. To discuss the economics first, a few days ago, it was suggested by some of us, as forcefully as we knew how, that in order for the country to be unable to ignore and to forget the slaughter of 6 children in an American city, and in order to join the issue and bring the battle to where the battle really is, that is to say, to strike at the economic structure, that no one, black or white, should buy any presents for Christmas. I think that we should spell this out perhaps a little more precisely. I mean, and now I am speaking for myself, that in this Christian nation, Christmas is mainly, as indeed are most churches, a commercial endeavor, having nothing whatever to do with the birth or the death of Christ. That if one begins to serve notice, ultimately on the banks, that we, the citizens of this country, do not consider that we have the right to celebrate Christmas this year, and that furthermore, we will use every weapon in our power to force this on the attention of the American Republic, which unluckily, I have to say, has its conscience mainly in its pocketbook. I believe that we will begin to see some notion of our potential power. Let me put it this way. Before this country was established, when the country was being established, and this apart from what one's textbooks say, and in contradistinction to the television myths about the building, the discovery of America, the people who came to America, as it turns out, were neither heroes, saints, nor pilgrims. They were simply people who couldn't make it where they were. And that is why they came. They came here to make, as we like to say, a better life for themselves and their children. And as it turned out, and as it always does indeed turn out, what they meant by a better life for themselves and their children was the opportunity to make more money and oppress somebody else. Which is what they did. The Indians have vanished, except for those we have under protective custody. And in order to build the country, it was necessary to find a source of cheap labor. And therefore, 400 years later, I represent the only man who never wanted to come here. But if I had not come under the double coercion of the Bible and the gun, I very much doubt that we would have all those railroads, and cotton would never have become king. And in short, the American economy would be at best a very different matter. Now, if we had the economic weight to line the track and dam the rivers and hoe the cotton and also raise the children, we can now use that weight for the first time for ourselves and for the liberation of this country. It is not true that there is nothing Negroes can do to help themselves, A. And B, it is not true that we, this nation, must be perpetually blackmailed by our government. The government represents us. And finally, C, neither is it true, as so many of the Negroes' friends would have us believe, that the only terms on which we can move to freedom are the terms of Harry Ashmore or Harry Golden. We, the people, are responsible for our own freedom. We are not begging for it. It is up to us to take it. Mr. Livingston said a little earlier something I would like to paraphrase. He said, quoting a friend of his in Birmingham, that the only thing worse than being black in Birmingham is being black and white together. But I would like to paraphrase that a little bit, speaking now of morality, that the only thing worse these days than being a black man in America is being a white man in America. I mean that we are living in a segregated society, which does not mean, as people imagine, that it is simply I who am segregated. It means you are, we all are, and we cannot talk to each other because of the force of social custom and the tyranny of the Southern oligarchy. When I talk about economics, therefore, I am trying to suggest to you, to all of you, that all of you begin to think in very concrete terms. For example, Birmingham is a monstrous city indeed, but Birmingham is not really any worse than New York. There is no place, there is not 1 square inch of American soil in which a black man can be considered to be free. And if that is so for black men, that is true for all of us. New York is not a segregated city by an act of God or by accident. It is a segregated city partly because a vast number of people and a vast complex of interest make a tremendous profit on the blood of black boys and girls, on the continued imprisonment and the continued demoralization of 1/10 of our population. Now, if it is so that Harlem exists principally for the benefit of people who like money, then it is also possible that one can begin to organize in the ghettos of this nation a massive civil disobedience campaign. And let me spell out a little bit, I want to be as precise as I can, of what I mean by that. I was born in Harlem. I was raised in Harlem. And indeed, as long as I live, I will never be able really to leave Harlem. As they say, you can take the child out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the child. I know, therefore, what rents one pays for what. I know what you pay for meat, cabbage, clothes, life insurance, theft insurance, fire insurance, and all of this money feeds, ladies and gentlemen, helps to feed the oppressor who uses the money to keep you in jail. Now, isn't it worth considering what one might be able to do if, instead of meekly submitting to this species of rape, one decided that instead of paying the rent, one refused to pay the rent. And when it is said that it is illegal to pay the rent, The answer is, it is immoral to charge rent for the houses in which we live. I think that this, for example, among other things, begins to force the economic structure to deal with the problem which will destroy us if we do not deal with it. Because no matter what I may feel, for example, about nonviolence, or no matter how I may feel about how people should treat each other, and no matter how I try to live my life, I'm also aware, and I must be aware, that most people are not really interested, or do not dare perhaps, in any case do not act toward others as they would like to have others act toward them. And therefore, there is something ultimately futile and terribly dangerous with having so many Negro boys and girls and men and women in the streets so long. I know that this peculiar country has admired the doctrine of nonviolence for 6 or 8 or 9 years and has applauded all those children and all those ministers and all those men and women who went to jail, who got beaten with chains and with hoses, and who were attacked by dogs, has admired them and has done nothing whatever to help them. And furthermore, not only that, which would be bad enough, intends to keep on admiring them and sending them to jail and doing nothing whatever to help them. Now, I think it is time to blow the whistle. I think it is time to begin to deal with the power structure. We're not dealing with white people. It's not a matter of what white people think about you or even what they think about themselves. What one has to do is examine and overhaul the system which creates this and perpetuates it. It is very important parenthesis, I think, that I probably ought to make. One's got to point out, I think, that in this country, since the McCarthy era, and is one of the reasons for our absolutely spectacular impotence, anyone who mentioned the word economics was promptly given a ticket to Moscow. I think it is beneath me to say that I am not a communist. I think it's beneath the nation, and very dangerous for the nation, to raise this peculiar red herring the moment one begins to deal with things as they are. Now, the nation which admires the doctrine of nonviolence has never, in my experience, and never as far as I know in its history, which began, if you remember, in Europe, admired nonviolence before. One of the myths of the English is they would never be slaves. One of the reasons Gary Cooper was and Humphrey Bogart were such powerful movie stars, they always had a gun. It's only when a black man says that he might go out and find himself a gun that the country becomes Christian for the first and only time. Now, speaking for myself and trying as best I can to discharge what I take to be my responsibility to everyone in the streets, including me, I don't want to see any more blood. Nobody's blood. My God. You know, if we could end the nightmare tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I could die, in peace. But in fact, the nightmare will not be ended tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And the nation which has admired these boys and girls and men and women overlooks the fact that a boy who was, let us say, 17 in 1955 has now spent 8 years in the streets, is probably under a doctor's care for being beaten half to death by the power structure, ladies and gentlemen, not simply by some idle policeman. Policemen know who they're working for. And by this time, the boy and his wife and his children are very nearly at the end of their rope and are about to crack. This is why it is so important now to try to be precise about what it is that we must do. It is impossible. All my liberal friends and critics to the contrary, it is absolutely impossible for any Negro in this country to be fitted into the structure as it now exists. That is not a possibility. One must be willing to take upon oneself the responsibility of examining and changing the structure so that it becomes more human for everybody. What the Negro's friends pretend, and I'm sorry, baby, but with friends like that, you don't need no enemies, What the Negro's friends pretend is that all the Negro wants is just another Cadillac. He wants to get to be just like Eisenhower. Well, I, speaking for myself, would rather cut my throat than suppose that my forefathers bled and suffered and died for this in this country in order to become yet another blank mediocrity. What we can do, and again, if you remember what I tried to say about economics, and I talked about the lining of the track and what would have happened if we hadn't lined the track. If you think about the myths that American white people have created about American black people, you begin to have some notion of the weight black people have in white people's consciences. It was never true, for example, that I came here wanting to rape nobody, And in fact, I very rarely carried a knife. And I know how to hold my liquor. But the myths to which one is subjected are the most terrifying symptom of the emotional and spiritual and sexual poverty and panic of the American people. If one is aware of this, then one recognizes, I think this is a most valuable suggestion, that it is not the Negro who is in jail. It is white people who are in jail. When white people can produce, when this white republic can produce, in the streets of Birmingham, for example, children who can do what those black children did, then we may be beginning to approach equality. I think the other reason, and perhaps the most important reason, that I'm throwing the suggestions out to you tonight, is that in this country, every black man born in this country until this present moment is born into a country which assures him in as many ways as it can find that he is not worth the dirt he walks on. Every Negro boy and every Negro girl born in this country until this present moment undergoes the agony of trying to find in the body politic, in the body social, outside himself, herself, some image of himself or herself which is not demeaning. And if you doubt me, you check out your textbooks and Hollywood, to name only those two things. Now, many, indeed, have survived, and at an incalculable cost. And many more have perished, and are perishing every day. If you tell a child, and do your best to prove to the child that he is not worth life, it is entirely possible that sooner or later the child begins to believe it and acts on it. It is one of the reasons, if I may be rude, that in every ghetto in this country, Saturday night is so dangerous a night among Negroes. They let it out with each other because they're too intimidated by what we still refer to as the man. And what I am trying to suggest is that we have the power to force the country to change its image of us, and we can do this by proving to ourselves and to the country what we can do for ourselves. We don't need yet to become the president of General Motors. We simply need to call the country on the common disaster, and they cannot put 20 million people in jail.
You're listening to James Baldwin on Voices of Pacifica.
You can obtain a copy of this program and other public radio programs by calling 1-800-735-0230.
Something happens to a person, as I know we all know, when he has achieved his first breakthrough. All I know about my own life, for example, is that I've been scared to death for 39 years and 6 months. And all I know about fear is that if you're afraid of it, walk toward it. No Negro in this country and no citizen of this country who aspires to create this country has any reason whatever to be afraid of, let us say, for example, Senator Eastland. We must make, can I say, the establishment afraid of us. And it is perfectly true, you know, I'm speaking only for Jimmy Baldwin again, that everybody in the country, in Washington, was terrified of the very idea of a march on Washington, and can scarcely be said to have embraced it until they realized they couldn't call it off. Now, if we begin to assess our real weight, our real potential, in the light of our common danger, we can get through this. We can win. We can turn the country into something which makes it a little less difficult to become a man. It is very hard to be black and grow up in this country. Manhood, as a friend of mine said, is a very dangerous pursuit for a black man. But I beg you to observe that it has also become a very dangerous pursuit for a white man. That is one of the reasons for Birmingham. It is not possible that all those people in that city really believed that they have the right to slaughter children. They don't believe that. They're afraid to speak. One of the reasons they are afraid to speak is that the standards by which we live, black and white, north and south in this country, are unlivable standards. It is not important to be safe. It is not important to get a car. It is not important to make it. It is important to become a man. And this is what we have forgotten. And that is one of the reasons that the caliber of our political representatives has become one of the mockeries of the 20th century. There is, my friends, really a point at which one has to say, I will not choose between the lesser of two evils. There is no such thing as a lesser of two evils. If the political machines in Washington and elsewhere in the nation cannot throw up better material than Mr. Goldwater, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Kennedy, and so on down an extremely dreary line, then perhaps we, the people whom these dreary people are supposed to represent, ought to find a way of being represented. We are not, are we, at the mercy of our political institutions? If we created them, we are responsible for them. We have the right and the duty to overhaul them, to change them. We are not, are we, so helpless that Senator Easton has to stay there forever? Who said so? Isn't it a scandal that in a civilized nation, the death of 6 children should be met by the cynical, I repeat, cynical appointment of a football player, an ex-general, I dare them to go to any Birmingham barber shop and talk to anybody. I dare them. And I think that commission, the appointment of that commission, the very notion, and the apathy with which the country has greeted it, proves my point. We have no right to allow the death of 6 children and our common disaster and our common crisis and our moral crisis to be met in this way. It proves, if anything does, that the terms of negotiation must now be radically changed. One cannot negotiate with the representatives of one's oppressor. One must force the administration to recognize that as long as Eastland holds his office, is a Democrat, no one who wants a free country can vote the Democratic ticket. And as long as Goldwater holds his place, No one who wants a free country can vote the Republican ticket. It is time to let the nation know that the death of my child, I as a black man, and the spiritual death of your child, you as a white man, cannot be met by sending down a commission to find out what happened. We know what happened. What we have to do is prevent it from happening again. And in order to do that, one doesn't beg the Birmingham City Fathers for a truce. You use whatever weight you have to force them to recognize your presence in that city, in that state, and in this country as a man. No matter what it costs who. I want to say two more things, and then I will leave you. One of them is, it's very important to recognize that the economy of which we are so proud has very shaky foundations. It is very important to recognize that in any case, the economy as it now exists cannot, does not, and cannot supply full employment, that there are more white people out of work numerically than Negroes, and that the future does not look bright. And in my view, though I'm willing to be corrected, I think it is better to spotlight this condition now than wait and have a collapse and precipitate chaos. We can guide the avalanche, or we can try. We haven't got to surrender to it. And the last thing I want to say to you, to suggest to you, is that we in this country, black and white, do have in our hands at this moment an enormous and expensive opportunity. If we can think through our situation, if we can face it, we can do something which has not been done in the history of the world before. The terms of our revolution, the American Revolution, the terms of these, not that I drive you out or that you drive me out, but that we come together and embrace and learn to live together. That is the only way that we can have achieved the American Revolution. Now, if we can face this, and it involves facing a great many things, it demands that white people face the fact that I, for example, or any black person they will ever meet or have ever met, I'm not an exotic rarity. I'm not a stranger. I'm none of those things. On the contrary, for all you know, I might be your uncle, your brother, your cousin. Among other things. One of the things that has happened here, and the pathology of the Deep South proves it, so does the pathology of the North, which dictates to them that they move out when I move in. Among other things which have to be excavated here is the fact that this long history is also the history of a love affair. One has got to face this. I'm no longer really black. Maybe I would like to be. Maybe I'd like to go back to Sierra Leone, for example. That was where I came from. But I've been here a long, 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 long time. And I'm now a part of you. And you are a part of me. And the conditions of our maturity, which is our survival, is that we accept this fact and rejoice in it. If we could do that, we might open up and by the example of our own lives and bodies, a possibility that in the future, mankind all over the world will not find it necessary to blow each other up in order to settle a quarrel. Thank you.
That was a talk by James Baldwin given in New York City, September 25, 1963, less than a month after the March on Washington and 10 days after the infamous Birmingham church bombing that resulted in the deaths of 6 children.